Phil and everyone for inviting me to chair this or facilitate this panel. And let me quickly kind of introduce the panelists. There are longer descriptions of everyone in the brochure, obviously, so I won't go through everyone's resume, but let me just sort of say who's here and give a quick intro of kind of the idea behind this panel and what we want to talk about. So just first going from nearest me down the line, Dean Daimleitner is next to me from Washington and Lee Law School. She is both the Dean and the Roy Steinheimer Professor of Law, and as are more important for our purposes, has written recently about change in law schools, the challenges of legal education, sort of the crisis that we've been going through, all sorts of themes that are relevant for our conversation. Next to her is my colleague Melissa Hart from the law school, who's both a professor of law and the director of the Byron White Constitutional Law Center, and who also, as part of that, runs the Marshall Brennan Constitutional Literacy Project, which is talk about an innovative project. Is a project that takes law students and brings them into high schools and has them teaching con law across the state in high school programs. Next to her is Bill Henderson, who is here from Indiana, is a professor of law there, and I don't know what this means, but the Val Nolan Faculty Fellow. And it's a good thing, whatever it is. If you don't know Bill has written extensively about these same themes, the challenges right now in legal education, the challenges in law firms, and in sort of the entire legal profession. And as Phil mentioned very briefly in passing in the chat they just had, recently wrote something called A Blueprint for Change, talking about some of those ideas as well. And last on the far right, as you see it, is Dean Michael Moffitt from the University of Oregon Law School, who is an old friend, so this was a great excuse to get him to Boulder, and sort of as with Dean Daimleitner is, at the cutting edge, I guess, or sort of the bleeding edge with our Dean, Phil Weiser, of trying to turn the ship, right? Trying to say, okay, if you happen to be a dean at the moment, you have inherited a crisis and trying to figure out what to do with that. Let me say a few words about what we're going to try to talk about. In the title of this panel, there are a lot of words in the title of this panel, but the one that I want to focus on the most is the word how. So in the discussion they just had about process and innovative process and what kind of process generates experimentation and what kind of process generates change, we really want to focus in this panel on that question. What is it that law schools can be doing? What kind of processes and discussions can they be having to get change going? I don't think the clicker's clicking. Obviously, why? Because I think, as Phil said, if you didn't think there was some kind of crisis going on, you probably wouldn't be here at the conference. I'm not going to put up a whole bunch of slides about what's happened to legal education and the legal profession over the last few years, but it's been disruptive, to say the least. The graph on the upper left is the number of LSAT tests administered over the last decade, and you don't have to even be able to read the little numbers to see the shape of the graph. And in addition to that, obviously, legal employment, all sorts of things have been changing simultaneously. One of the things in conversations like the conversations we're going to have all day here that you tend to see is lots of discussion and obsession in some ways about these symptoms. So what's happening? Lots of things are happening, right? So there's lots of symptoms that are leading to discussions like today's. And then you also see lots of stories about causation, right? So what's causing the need for innovation? What's the problem behind dropping LSAT or enrollment? And folks have all sorts of different answers. Some folks say, well, it's outsourcing, right? Jobs are going overseas. Some folks say, no, it's digital disruption. Technology is the culprit here, or technology is the driving force of change. Some folks say it's massive changes in the way education is happening or could be happening, massive online courses and everything's going to go digital, and that's what's disrupting or going to disrupt legal education and the legal profession. There's lots of, in addition to just describing the symptoms, there's lots of different and often conflicting versions of the diagnosis, right? So why is this a problem? Well, people have all sorts of different answers. And then, of course, there's also lots of different prescriptions that people tend to start, talking about. We should have more innovation. The top little slide there, or part of the slide, is a conference from last year called Future Law. There's lots of discussion of this is what we should do next. We should do more of X or less of Y, or some combination thereof. And often, as I've listened to these kinds of conversations, and you may be the same, the prescriptions don't always tightly connect to the causal stories of what is going wrong. Something bad is happening, so quick, do something else. And that's not always super helpful, but it is certainly on the minds of everyone in legal academia, at least, that some things maybe need to change. What are they? Now, I think if you're at all familiar with law schools, this may seem like an oxymoron, right? So talking about innovation in the context of a law school can feel a little weird. This cartoon at the bottom, it says, "I'll be happy to give you innovative thinking. What are the guidelines?" This can be the way it feels sometimes on a law faculty when you say, "Hey, let's try to do something different," and maybe either the discussion isn't set up for that, or people aren't sort of prone to that. And the Legal Academy has been, over the last several years, as this crisis, or whatever word you want to put on it, has been unfolding, there have been quite a lot of voices saying, wait, I'm not sure, or we're not sure we should do anything, or if we should do anything, what the something should be. Just this week, there was a New York Times op-ed that's gotten some discussion already by Dean Chemerinsky from Irvine and Professor Carrie Minkle-Meadow from Georgetown and Irvine. And to some extent, this op-ed on Monday was framed as a this is still a good time to go to law school piece. But in a lot of ways, if you read it, what it really was saying was, gee, we probably should be doing something in response to this crisis, but we're not sure we know what it is. And you may be doing the wrong things. And part of our goal for this first panel is to talk about, well, how would we know whether we were doing the right things or the wrong things, and what would that process of innovation look like? So with that sort of quick and relatively messy introduction, let me just start. And I'll say our plan, as with all these panels, I guess since we're the first panel, I should say this, is to talk for a while amongst the panelists and then leave time for questions. If you have an absolutely burning question in the beginning that you just can't sit on, feel free to raise your hand and ask it, and I'll feel free to ask you to wait for an answer if I need to. But we will talk for some period of time, and then I promise you we will leave ample time for questions towards the end. So let me just start just continuing the conversation that Phil and George were having, which is at one point somebody said, I guess Otto said, what's the future of law schools? And George's answer was, I don't know, but the future of law schools depends on the rate of experimentation. Any reactions to that? I mean, what is the rate of experimentation in law schools?
I tweeted it when I was sitting over there.
You tweeted George's quote?
Yeah, exactly, almost verbatim, and I said I totally agree with it. I think that I've been thinking about this panel because Scott was nice enough to circulate some questions in advance, and I thought about the questions. And when we get together for these conferences, I think it's framed as such to where, what's the Legal Academy going to do? And I've been the person who has said, well, I don't think it's really going to be like we're going to have a regulatory change or we're going to come up with a new model and we're all going to move toward it. It's going to be institutional. We're going to be kind of competing with one another. And I've been thinking about experimentation at a institutional level, and even kind of cutting it down, just saying we just need 12 to 20%, and then we'll leave the rest of it intact. But the more I've thought about it, the more, and I think about my own career arc after I got tenure, because I viewed tenure as a license to experiment. I mean, because you know, they were going to be a long rope until they would hold me accountable for my output. You know, because now that once I had tenure, and I really do think that the experiment is really taking place in the classrooms, some more than others. But I think about how I decided I wanted to learn how to be good at teaching teamwork. And that started in 2010. I can honestly say now in 2014, I think we're pretty good at it, and we teach it in the 1L class. And my experimentation led to a kind of a grant of authority to experiment within the four credits of the first year. And we collected a ton of data. We every year we got better at it. We held focus groups. We looked at our LESI scores. We had 360 evaluations from students. We asked the upperclassmen what their opinions were. And if we try to take teamwork away from the Indiana curriculum, I think that the students would be upset about it. It's broken down social isolation. It's led to some, I think greater community. The students, through their 360 evaluations, use this to bridge into jobs because they can talk about what they've learned in a teamwork environment. And that experimentation started with me teaching a project management class in 2010. Started with a theory that I didn't know if it was going to be right, but Norris School deserves credit for experimentation on the third year, but the experimentation, I think that to get it to work, it's one thing to have a theory and get some good press clippings. It's another thing to get it to work, and it's very difficult because the biggest resistance initially is students. Because they come in and you do something that's different than the paper chase model, and it's greeted with some suspicion. So it's hard to get this stuff to work. You do have to experiment. You do have to collect data. You do have to work backwards from bright spots and from the outcome you want.
I just want to say on that, I think the risks of experimentation present real obstacles to experimentation, and I think, which doesn't mean we shouldn't do it.
You got tenure. I feel like I have a pretty big pass to experiment because I have tenure.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm glad you feel that way, and we're all benefiting from it. But I think that I also think you've received tremendous institutional support and public support. And I think one of the challenges for individuals at other institutions trying to experiment is, even at an institution like Colorado Law that is pretty committed to innovation, face challenges from, for example, over the past few years, I've been trying to do some new things in my classes, and I can tell you that my FCQs, when I just taught the way everyone expected me to teach, were excellent. They're not so good anymore. And yes, I have tenure, so it doesn't matter, but it's actually painful. It's painful on an annual semester basis, and it's painful because you don't know, well, does that mean the experiment failed? Or does that mean it's just different from what they expected and they don't know how to evaluate it? And how do I evaluate whether it worked or didn't work? So I think one of the challenges is we have so many structures, law schools have so many structures in place, so many guidelines for how we evaluate ourselves, how we ask students to evaluate us, how we evaluate our colleagues, that push back against experimentation, that it requires the freedom of tenure, but I think it then also requires sort of a self-conscious willingness to ignore some of those judgments. And I think that is very difficult, which I don't think means we shouldn't do it, but I think it's one of the things that stands in the way sometimes of innovation. And the other thing that I wanted to say that I was very struck by in the earlier conversation, and I don't mean to be a downer, because I actually think experimentation is the key, but the costs of experimentation are also very high. Doing things, I was so struck by the description of where George's kids go to school. It sounds a lot like where my kids go to school. It's a private school. They get lots and lots and lots of creative, independent thinking and focus, and we pay lots and lots of money for them to get that. And trying to do that either for everyone or inexpensively, either at a young age or at the law school age, I think we need to do it, but I think it really is a challenge to figure out how you create that space for creativity and experimentation and do it without running up against the financial problems that are the other side of the crisis that everyone's talking about.
Let me take that on to some extent as well, because I actually see the students somewhat differently.
They can't hear you. I'm not sure why.
I'm not sure
Is
why.
your thing on?
It's not on, so I'm hoping this is better now. I think a couple of thoughts I have on students. I actually think it is this generation, and surely the next generation, however we measure generations of students, who will force us to do things very differently, because I think they're coming in having a very different educational experience. They are often driven by what their friends do at other schools, who are at other law schools, I think, or sometimes what another section is doing if it's the same class. So it helps to have a group of faculty, and it doesn't have to be the whole faculty. It never will be the whole faculty. I think we all know that. But to have at least a small core group of people who prepare them for that change. It's even more successful if you have alumni who can come back and talk about how your class now is so much more valuable to them than the way it used to be taught, even though it was a great class. But now it really provides some benefit later on. So I think that's part of the story. I think the other part is students, in my experience, like being part of the process. They like being asked after a quarter of the semester what is working, what is not working, and how can they help improve it. So much more of a partnership, I think, than just the old traditional teaching model, which of course has a lot to do with room configurations, and I think we all have many rooms like this in our buildings. A lot of it has to do with having the willingness to make changes or not make changes because students are advocating for or against them. But I think I found students generally very helpful in thinking through that process, and also being much more understanding when you explain to them why you were thinking something should be working, and maybe they don't see it quite that way. But let me also address your last point, because I think that is the problem, and I think everything is driven by the cost question. I was just looking at your slide about the 59 schools that have less than half of their student population in full-time legal employment. And that's, of course, a terrible number if those other 50% wanted to have those jobs. But what I am a little bit concerned about what we're doing right now is not at all helping the students who either never wanted to be or have now decided that they do not want to be your traditional lawyer. The problem is the cost, that they often think they cannot afford to make that decision, or they've spent so much money that somehow they should be legal service providers in the traditional sense. And I think that's really where a lot of the problems are coming from, at least in my opinion. And just one last thought on experimentation, and I think this is in line with many of the things that Bill is thinking. I think one of the problems is not just the academy, but it's also our discipline. I think law is not the most progressive discipline and does not necessarily attract the people who think of themselves or start out thinking of themselves, as Phil said, kind of as entrepreneurial or innovators. And oftentimes I see faculty saying, oh, is anybody else doing that? I mean, obviously our faculty didn't have a model somewhere else, but it's that risk averseness. Well, if somebody else is doing it, and it's working, then maybe we can do it as well. But if no one else is doing it, there's got to be a flaw in our thinking about this. So maybe there are problems we haven't seen about it yet. So let's wait till someone else does it. Of course, that doesn't make any sense. That leads to no diversification. It doesn't lead to a lot of innovation. But I think we're sometimes in our own way in that respect, for better or worse.
One of the other, I'm extraordinarily loud, I don't know why. One of the other, I think, challenges to innovation has to do with the innovation cycle and its overlay on the academic calendar and the student's progression. In an idealized environment for innovation, you would have multiple iterations, and to pick up on George's notion that there aren't failures, it just produced a lot of good, helpful data for the next one. That's all well and good. But not if you're a 1L and those first data are your first semester's grades. And frankly, not if you're a law school and those data are the next year's rankings or something. There are not as many opportunities to iterate as you would want if what you really want is wild experimentation, because there are opportunities for punishing conspicuous failure or at least lack of the data that you would have initially wanted. It's also, I don't know that it's paradoxically, but we've got to be innovating right now, and now is exactly the hardest time to do it if what you want is some easy context, some cushy. Doesn't matter what any of us do at our law schools next year, that first graph about people taking the LSATs isn't going to radically change because of it. And so it will lead to, I think, a not helpful critique, but a persistent one. Well, we changed how we teach second semester property, and we still don't have as many applicants. Right, true. That's actually hard, and it gets, I think that George did a nice job of saying we're not maybe defining the problem correctly, but boy, that's a problem out there, and it's not easy to innovate in a tiny piece of the pie, and especially not to do it over and over.
So there are a lot of things that have come up and people have said. Let me just pick up on one. I mean, what are, a lot of what we've seen so far over the last however many years in this post 2008 2009 period is, you could sort of classify as triage, right? Slash costs, control costs, try to give out more scholarships, try to recruit more students, try to get everything stabilized, at least in the schools that have been been pummeled by all of this. On the positive side, right, on the creative side, on the generative side, on the innovative side, what are some of the things you've seen? So, for example, if you could describe a little bit about what you've done at your school, or any of the things you've seen other schools do that you sort of hold out and say, hey, law schools are doing some things. Whether they're going to work perfectly or not, we're not sure yet, maybe, but at least there's some experimentation, some generativity going on.
No, I'd be happy to do that. And I have to preface this by saying the faculty really did this quite a while before 2008. So I don't want to give anybody the impression that we were so incredibly fast. I think we were very thoughtful about it and tried out this new curriculum for 2 years before making it absolutely permanent, in part because you can't bring in a class and tell them this will happen, and then you do something very different to them. So let me give you a sense of what the 3L curriculum looks like. So there are components of it that are mandatory for every student, but then there are components of it that are very, of course, elective. So we're starting the fall semester with a two-week, what I'd call trial advocacy immersion. So it's really walking them through a simulated case. At the end, every single one of our students does a jury trial. Now, I should also tell you that we have a very small student body. We generally have about 100 to 125 students in a class. So I think that's a much harder thing to do if you have 250, let alone 500 students. So this means we have a lot of 10, 12 person sections that have to be staffed for 2 weeks at the beginning of the fall semester. Beginning of the spring semester, everybody does a two-week transactional immersion program. Sale of a company, working out an executive comp agreement, lots of teamwork, obviously, in those processes. And the goal was to expose every student to both sides, the transactional side and the litigation side, whether that was where they wanted to be or not, but just to think about how one obviously impacts the other. The rest of the 2 semesters is devoted to one life client experience at a minimum that every student has to have. So that can be one of our 6 clinics, or it can be a externship either somewhere in our area. Some of them are farther away. We've had them as far away as Chicago, or the DC program, where we are doing them with federal government agencies. And at the same time, every one of the students has to at least take one practicum in a semester. And what that means is it's basically a simulated class that's either taught by a full-time faculty member or a combination of full-time faculty member adjunct, or sometimes it's a group of adjuncts. So just to give you an example of that, we have an M&A practicum, which is taught by a group of pretty high-profile M&A lawyers who come every week different lawyers, different components of a transaction that the students would be working on. And just to support Mike's point, how this can kind of go awry the first semester they taught it, they would try to treat the third-year students as if they were first-year associates. So Friday night, the students would get an email around 9, 10 o'clock that the memo needed to be done by 9 a.m. Saturday morning. Now, my understanding is that this created such an uproar and some resistance on part of the students that I think now these emails come a lot earlier on Friday, and I think the deadline is more like Monday. So they're still trying to simulate the real experience, but I think with a little understanding that maybe 3L law students are different. But what's interesting about that particular practicum, for example, is that the lawyers who teach it have said this is something that they would have taught young associates in their firm a few years ago, but there's just no time to do that anymore. So they actually don't provide that training to their young associates, but they do it in the classroom. So to me, that was kind of an interesting instructional experience also on how law firms have really changed training and to some extent moved some of that, I think, back into the law schools to the extent that they've been able to.
And when you think back on the process within the faculty or within the school that led to that change, right? That led to you doing this thing, what are the qualities of that process? What are the parts of that process that you think helped the change occur and were successful? Like how did the idea come up? How did the faculty vet it? How did you figure it out? What was it that was successful in that discussion?
I mean, obviously that precedes long my time, but I've heard the explanations about it. Part of it, I mean, it all emanated really from within the faculty. I know a lot of people have said it was a dean. He kind of helped jumpstart it, but the plan actually had been existent in the faculty. Some of it was driven by two faculty members who were basically teaching these types of practicums already. So the faculty had, I think, confidence in the people who were teaching them and knew that this was a model that could really be successful. Obviously, we also had clinics, and I think they were also taught by faculty members who were highly regarded and very well respected, which makes a big difference. And there was a core group of members of the faculty who believed that the third year needed to be entirely rethought, and that it just should not be kind of a more specialized version of the second year. Now, it was a very, I think, risky move, and there were a lot of people who did not want to see it happen. But then the other part that really helped was a 2-year pilot. So students could elect into this new curriculum or take the traditional curriculum. And that was really important. Initially, for example, what I just described to you was all the students were allowed to take. There's some other little, well, not little, there's a legal profession course, for example, that's required, but that was all they were allowed to do. Student comes in and says, just got a federal clerkship, the judge said I need to take Fed Jur, which I didn't take my second year. Now, under the new curriculum, technically that would have been prohibited. So of course that student got a waiver, but the faculty also realized that they can either adjudicate these waivers all the time, or that they can think about building more flexibility into the program. So that flexibility is now in the program. Everyone can take a traditional second-year course if they need to or want to. They don't have to, but that would have never happened. I think that would have been a much more painful process had it been mandated immediately. And that also got student buy-in because the students who weren't in the program, they still started taking some of the practicum courses. So it was really expanding their choices. They saw how good it was, how well it worked. So it was a process really over time that created the buy-in.
Other examples of experimentation that you hold on to as successes?
Our biggest experimentation was not actually in our JD program. It was a recognition that there was a declining demand for the one product that we've been selling for as long as we've existed. But I didn't think it was a reflection of a decrease in demand for legal education. It was just that we were selling one product that cost $100,000 and took 3 years. And so instead we've moved and taken a lot of the teaching capacity in the building and moved it into the undergrad and other graduate school areas. There are a lot of people who go to business school who don't want a JD, but should you really get a degree in business and not know anything about contracts or IP? If you want to get a planning degree, do you need a JD? No, but should you know something about local government or administrative law? If you're going to be a family therapist, maybe a little bit about family law would be helpful. There are just a lot of these sorts of examples where people are willing to pay us money to do what it is that we're actually good at, which is teach people about law. They just don't want the product in which we've packaged legal education at the moment. And so we're devoting an increasing percentage of our faculty's resources against these undergraduate and graduate education packages in ways that perfectly sort of Tetris-like mirror the decrease in our JD population, so that we haven't had to do all of the triage that some schools have had to without changing the core of what it is that we do. We've just had to be innovative in thinking about, and that turns out to be a really hard question. How do you teach people who don't want to be lawyers about the law? We don't have a lot of practice with that. But there are a lot of people out there who have a lot of practice at teaching those kinds of disciplines. You just need to look for the analogies and then be open to learning to teach again.
And in terms of how you got that going, again, was that a faculty-driven thing? Was it you, the dean?
Some of each, and we didn't start this until after 2008, and there is something, those graphs are enormously motivating. They don't always motivate in entirely reliably productive ways, but you really don't spend very long in a faculty meeting arguing about whether or not we need to try something. Those graphs answer that question. We do need to try something. We have a fight about whether this is the thing to try or that is the thing to try. But once you take as a given that the demand for the JD is down, unless we want to shrink, it wasn't in our case a very long or hard. It took a couple of years. It took a lot of faculty input with a lot of nudges from the dean.
Yeah.
Can I ask another question about that? What about the undergraduate reaction to kind of your move into that area?
So it depends which part of the undergraduate you mean, because you could mean the undergrad students who think this is the greatest thing. For at least the first year, every class that we offered subscribed to its room limit the day we offered it. Undergrads want this stuff. They want to learn about it. And the idea of learning about it from a law professor is almost intolerably sexy to an undergrad. And so they...
Not something you hear about law professors very much.
Yeah.
That's good.
We got lucky at Oregon because the University of Oregon is right now experiencing a just tremendous growth in demand for its undergraduate population. And so it can't grow its undergraduate, its traditional arts and science faculty fast enough to accommodate the high quality applicants they're getting. We're essentially living a business school case study because we have capacity and they have demand. And so the reaction from the highest levels, now there are a lot of very detailed places where that gets itchy. The political science department and the sociology department have many opinions about the carpetbagging law professors or the fear. I think the very legitimate fear is that we aren't actually serving new population. It's just a cannibalized move within a fixed pie university. We turn out not to be in a context where that's true, but that would be a real concern if the university didn't have the demand growth that would make it something other than internally competitive.
Bill, I couldn't tell if you wanted to jump in. So let me ask a slightly different question, then we're going to just go to questions and Q&A. And this is something I sent around in the email before we all got here, but what do you think the barriers to developing a new model, as the title says, really are? I mean, I've heard some cost and risk. I've heard some student pushback. But when you've looked at either your own school or other schools trying to innovate, what's holding that back in this context?
Faculty meetings.
Faculty meetings? You can blame faculty meetings for pretty much anything, but what about faculty meetings? That you have to have them?
No, but I think that the idea that you need to have consensus on it, I think the experimentation would be, I've got an idea, I've got a small sandbox, nobody's going to get hurt, and let's see if this works, and we'll report back up to the mothership. The idea that we're going to change the curriculum, just like, how about if we take a small group or a coalition of the willing and we do it, and we don't have to run it through anything except for educational policy, and they can sign up and say, yeah, tell us what you find here. I think being overambitious. I think when I wrote down the answer to your question, doubt is the biggest barrier, and not starting. And so I think it's very important to experiment. Is really the key, and make the stakes fairly small, and then the little wins. There's a whole literature on change management. Little wins is we should be starting. And Michael, I'm very curious about your program, because I do think that the world we're headed into probably needs fewer licensed lawyers, but the world we're headed into globally is a world that's going to be knitted together by rule of law, hopefully. So law is going to be very important, and it's going to be much more interdisciplinary. And so I like this idea, this whole design school thing of using some university resources, but we just have to start small and not think about what we're going to change legal education. No, we're going to change a couple of classes. We're going to have a certificate program. We'll see how it works. We're going to pay attention to Michael.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I also think related to that, one of the things that because it is hard. It's hard to make an entire faculty decide, all right, here's what we're going to do next, and we'll try it even for 2 years of a pilot. That's still a commitment, and it requires a lot of compromise that it sometimes means people have to feel that their particular skills aren't being prioritized. And rather than doing that, let people do the things they're good at. I think one of the challenges is the way that the reward system for legal academics is structured right now makes it really hard to say, why doesn't a group of 6 of us, for example, one of the things I really think we need to be doing is, we talk a lot about experiential learning and practicums and things, which I think is great, but I would frame it a little bit differently and say that things need to be put more into context. So whether that's necessarily that it's a practical skills course, or whether it's that one of the things that I know people talk about at lots of law schools is that legal writing and torts and civil procedure should all be taught more together rather than in the siloed kinds of ways, that students would learn more and understand better what they were doing if they were being taught these classes in a more unified way. It would be more meaningful. It would be more meaningful if there were live client experiences on a regular basis. Well, to do that, which I think a lot of people would be interested in doing, when your traditional model of the expectations for what academics are doing are 40-40-20 research teaching service, is asking for something that is pretty hard to ask for. So I think if law schools would be more flexible in saying, we're giving you permission to go be 20/80 or whatever it is, go take some time to try this and try it with our blessing, our affirmative blessing. That's something that would move things forward significantly.
So let me take that and ask the 2 deans on the panel sort of how you react to that, because one of the things, the incentive structures in law schools are pretty inherited, right? I mean, the 40-40-20 thing is pretty common, or we have, some amount of emphasis on scholarship, some amount on teaching, some amount on research. If you've got a great young faculty member who comes to you and says, I really want to start this summer institute thing, and it's going to be great, and I think I can generate revenue, and it's going to be fantastic for this and that and the other thing, but I'm not going to be doing scholarship at the same time necessarily because I can't be everywhere. I'm guessing I know what you say, but I'm wondering sort of, maybe I'm wrong, and what's happening in those conversations? Like, do you think that the incentive structure is making it harder for that kind of thing to happen?
You want to take that first?
Yeah, go ahead, because I think I may have a different answer.
I have to admit.
Either, I don't know.
I mean, I'm happy to
Sure.
give that a start. I'm not sure what you mean by young, whether that means untenured or tenured. I think if it's an untenured faculty member, I'm not the sole decider on tenure. So it seems to me that I cannot, in good faith and conscience, recommend to that person not to do the article that the rest of the faculty will expect.
Right.
That's just not appropriate and fair. Now, if there is a way to work that out through a reduced load in the fall and have them build it up, or some other way to do it. The other thing you can't trade, which I think a lot of people think they can trade, is time and money are actually not fungible. So, you really have to think about what is accomplishable in time. But I think to take the summer of an untenured faculty member, we are requiring, kind of expecting, I think, an article a summer would be really a career killer for that person. If the person now is young and tenured, that's a very different conversation, it seems to me, because the faculty does not necessarily expect an article, especially if they're a full professor. I think one of my concerns about this system, though, and I think this plays into your comment, and I think Bill clearly didn't lose that impetus to try and do things other than what he had been doing. But if you have 5, 6-year tenure tracks, why are you expecting that person in year 7 to be a different person than you had trained them to be in the first 6 years? And that's really my fear, because I think it is that young untenured faculty member who comes in with maybe sometimes a better understanding of the market, a better understanding of the students they're teaching, all this energy, all this excitement about what they want to do, and you have to say, not now, but in 6 years we'll have a conversation, aside from the fact that at that point it's way too late, kind of even structurally, to do those things. So I think it's a really hard question.
Can I just, I want to answer the second part of your question regarding how does this, regarding what will cause change or innovations to fail. I think that the most important thing is that it has to have some approbation by someone external to the law school. I mean, the labor market, some employers have to do it. The best story I ever heard about this, and it's appropriate because George was here talking about the D School, is Randy Potch in his last lecture. He was a computer graphics a guy at Carnegie Mellon, and he caught cancer and ended up writing this book, The Last Lecture, but it kind of chronicling his career. And he talked about combining with people who are in the kind of the drama department at Carnegie Mellon and creating this kind of master's program where some of the leading kind of graphics places in Hollywood across the country came to his program and said, "We will hire anybody you admit to this program." If you think about that, no test scores, we don't even know who they are. It's the education itself that's so transformative. And I think, Dan and I were up there on the balcony talking about the huge opportunity there are for people that have domain knowledge plus have kind of coding skills. There's a huge, and that's a skill set that can be taught. And if that's taught and the employers come and they go on to great success, then other people are going to copy that model. But I mean, this isn't an aesthetic enterprise where the professors are impressed with what we're doing. It's going to, the thing that's going to really get traction are the things that people just say, "I like that, can I have another?"
Mm-hmm. Michael?
So I don't think I'd be ready to give a categorical answer, even as to the pre-tenure faculty member who comes with the idea. I'd want to know a whole lot more, not just about that person and how much they'd published so far, and I'd really, really want to figure out if this was going to make them happy. And I don't mean that in sort of a shallow, everybody at work should be happy way. I see a lot of people in law school right now spending a lot of their time not happy. And what I don't mean by that is they're unhappy a lot. I mean they're spending a lot of time actively being unhappy. And that's actually not productive. The people who are, there's some joy thing that causes people to work harder, better, and I can't put my finger on it, but if that pre-tenure person comes to me and says, "This is my passion, I really want to," I'd really be inclined to figure out a way to say yes to that. Now, that may be projecting. I helped launch a center when I was a pre-tenure faculty member, and it kept me motivated. But I just see it a lot that and it's not just pre-tenure faculty. It's full chaired, endowed professors. The happy ones are doing more, and I don't have a grand theory about it, but I guess I would be worried about just categorically saying no to the thing that maybe they're doing because they think it's the institutionally right service thing to do. That would be a good thing to say no to. But if this is really something they're passionate about, I'd be pretty inclined.
So let me open it up to questions. Yeah.
Is tenure a variable?
Oh, and I think is there a microphone we have to worry about or no?
Yes.
There is a microphone we have to worry about.
The issue of tenure has come up a lot, and so my question is tenure a barrier to change?
Great question.
Yes. I mean,
Great answer.
Yes.
Next. So if it's a barrier, why?
Is that someone who wants to answer that question?
That question comes up all the time, and I thought about answering it before, but I didn't want to be the one saying this is a problem. I think we're talking about retooling students. We're talking about retooling law school structures. We are, law faculty are smart people dedicated to teaching, and we ought to be talking also about how to retool ourselves to do these new things. Tenure doesn't have to be a barrier. Tenure is also a protection. There are costs to having tenure systems, but there are benefits, and those are important benefits, especially when you're talking about risks. I mean, various people said tenure makes it possible to take risks. We just have to make ourselves willing to do those despite the pain, the evaluations that don't look so good because things don't work right away. So I'm pretty passionate about the response to that, not being, we should just get rid of tenure and make ourselves over.
Well, and I just want to say, when I say at least that I think tenure is a barrier, I mean it. I do think it is as it's currently structured. I don't think that means that the answer is that law faculty shouldn't have tenured professors on them, or that, I think that would actually be horrible. But I think that we could be rethinking the 40-40-20 model. I think the question of whether what our jobs are is really the same as what the job of a history professor is a fair question to ask, and might lead to at least a range of tenure incentive structures rather than the unified structure that we currently have, that is unified with the rest of the with the PhDs at the university. That's
Yeah, up here in the front. Oh, or in the back. I'll let the man with the microphone decide.
Yeah, my name's Otto. I'm a 1L here. My question's for the deans on the panel, and I see Phil's back with us. If you want to take a stab at this as well, please. To what extent do you guys encourage faculty, or would you guys encourage faculty to engage in entrepreneurial endeavors if they came to you and said, for example, I've got a business concept that I think could help improve or implement change in the law school, an educational tool, for example. How might you respond to that? And in particular, how might you respond if they said, it might cut back on my publications or this normal split of my time?
I'm guessing that hasn't happened a lot, but maybe some.
Is that significantly different from saying I want to work on teaching in a different way? I guess I'm not sure why the answer would be different to either question.
At a very, very technical level, I work at a state school, and it takes basically an act of the Pope to get all the regs lined up in a way that would permit some of the things where dollars would flow in complicated ways. But if you just tweak the question a little bit so that it's outside activities that might link into the law school, sure. Just the very particular has some challenges for those of us who work in public universities.
You also got ABA regulations
that are
they affect the amount of time you spend doing things other than academic endeavors.
And the ABA has a lot of things it does in the name of consumer protection that, when put to the particulars of a hypothetical, are challenging. But I think those aren't unsolvable. They would be complicated not for philosophical reasons, but for these very practical reasons of what would that look like.
Can I jump in on that? I'm Dan Rodriguez, the dean at Northwestern. It's a variation of Bill's answer in terms of the external. Our faculty are motivated by fame and acclaim in their profession, defined somewhat differently by faculty members and defined by some faculty members in a pecuniary way and others not in a way. Frankly, some are defined by mobility and their ability to move along. But the basic answer is, when the external world within the legal academy and outside the legal academy seriously values making major steps at innovation, they will respond to those incentives. While they don't, they won't. whatever incentivizing the dean provides in that regard.
I completely agree with what Dan is saying, and I wrote a story for the ABA called "Who's Eating Law Firms Lunch," and I profiled Dan Katz sitting back there, be on another panel later on. And and Dan has said in the thing that one of his missions as an untenured faculty member was to put together a group of things that pulled together the employers. And there's the potential for money and fame, but it's just doing the right thing. It's innovation, and there's this kind of risk taking that has to take place that basically will kind of change the organism after some of his initiatives are successful. And this is going to happen organically over a period of time, but not all innovations you're going to be breaking some rules along the way here, kind of at least breaking norms. And I know that to a certain extent, Dan's story it rubs up against some norms. And I rub up against norms.
So, Otto, you directed at me. I'll offer a few thoughts. The first, I loved what Mike said, which is thinking about what helps our faculty members be fulfilled as human beings is an important part of the consideration. So the first conversation is when you have whatever project, I also liked Melissa's reframing. It could be a startup company, it could be a nonprofit, it could be a totally new model of teaching, but someone needs to do something different and innovative. How do you engage them? The biggest complication is what Nora said, which is, are they risking getting tenure by not doing what the legacy requires? Whether or not we'd start with that legacy if we could choose. That is where the tension goes. Now, on a personal level, I started out with this. I started out just like Mike. I started this center 1 year into law teaching, and it gave me extraordinary rewards, value, mission, and purpose. I happen to also like writing articles and wrote enough of them that I got tenure both under the legacy rules and made my experience as a professor work for me. What's really unfair is when you're saying to someone, sure, you can do whatever that other thing is, plus you also have to write those articles, if writing articles doesn't make that person happy. So we do have this challenge that some of the things that might be most valuable to people personally, might be valuable to us institutionally, are not the things that the legacy rules require. And that's a tension that I think Bill put his finger on, and as deans is one of the most painful things we have to confront.
There was, here, down in front. Just start talking. We'll get the microphone to you.
Can you hear me? I'm just curious because I feel like we have a real diversity of law schools here and people representing all of those law schools, that why it seems like most of the conversation has been limited to forming coalitions of faculty, core faculty that want to create a change within a school. But why, in terms of branding, when the Times articles and the way people perceive the profession is one fell swoop, why isn't there a coalition of law schools who are willing to brand themselves as the innovators or whatever, law school D or whatever it is, so that it's not just who's on what ranking on U.S. News and World Report, and we're all worried about that, but there's a new category of law schools that have formed, a self-definition to be innovators, like Washington and Lee was talking about changing third year. I mean, we're living in a world where third year is largely irrelevant. I mean, I graduated a couple of years ago, and I feel that conversation is really significant. So if there's a group of law schools and deans that get together and make that commitment, I feel like that could kind of incentivize the change within the schools to want to be on that team and want to be on that new coalition of law schools that really does want to change and is tired of business as usual. So I'm just wondering if there is a conversation of that type of coalition, or if not, why is that notably absent?
There are lots of them.
Yeah.
Everybody calls themselves an innovative law school.
Yeah, but I mean, like a formalized group where there's a list where you're not just thinking who's in the T14, you're thinking who's on this new list, and a marketing, because at least, I don't know, I mean, I try to follow, I haven't seen anything like that, maybe I'm out of the loop.
It takes a while to build it, but it's coming, and I've spent a lot of time working on it, and one of the schools will be CU Law, if I have anything to do with it, I'm always looking for deans to pull together to do something like that. It's definitely going to happen. It's going to. It just takes a while to put these things are complicated. They involve humans. It's complicated, but it's going to happen. Phil, would you agree that it might happen?
I mean, one of the ambitions of this conference is to help advance that. But here's the thing, it's going to be messy for a while.
Yeah.
There will be one master list.
Yep.
There'll be lots of different networks, collaborations, all of which we feel feeling their way towards a new model.
Yep.
But there are lots of those things that are happening and going to keep happening, and the ambition of this whole project is to be a part of that.
And there are examples of coalitions of law schools that have been going for a decade now. What you observe in the existing coalitions is they are geographically spread apart. They are not in the same competitive market. If we're just being blunt, Phil and I are actively in a bidding war against each other for students to enroll in August right now. Right? I mean, right? And I'm hoping I win, and he hopes he wins, and we're getting good, but go ahead.
Hold on just a sec. Hold on. Just let him finish.
It just, I'm just naming that is one of the constraints. And if Phil and I got together in a way that brought incremental students to us that we wouldn't otherwise get, there's real opportunity there. And I think there will be some of those, again, because law schools aren't going to be able to scale themselves to cover all the things that people want. He and I are going to figure out ways to share expertise or opportunities. And that's hard for all the reasons Bill has said.
And let me ask that because the question prompts me to think about something that George was talking about, which was at some point, George said, we got critical mass going, and then students started showing up to Stanford because we were there. Do you think, like, for example, right now with your third-year program, I mean, are you seeing students attracted to Washington and Lee because you're doing something innovative and different, the branding is working, and so it's, self-replicating and generative yet?
Yeah, I actually think you see both. And to me, that's really helpful. And I believe that we would all be better off if we had a little bit more diversity and were more distinguishable by more than geography and history. And we definitely have students who are coming specifically because of the third-year program. And actually, initially, it's been a little bit challenging because it's not the people who thought would be coming. It was especially people students who wanted to come straight out of college because they figured, this is going to make up for my lack of work experience. Now, we all know that employers like to see people who have had some work experience between college and law school. So I think that's been something that's been a little bit surprising, and we're just starting to address how, for somebody who has work experience, they haven't had legal work experience. So how is the difference from just having work experience so that it's also attractive to kind of slightly older students? And I think we've gotten that right now, but that was kind of a fallout. So you sometimes have these fallouts from programs that you may not be prepared for. I think another one was that we suddenly had not large, but a larger than expected group of students who in their third year said, that's what law practice is really all about? There is absolutely no way I'm interested in this. That's great. I mean, in a way, I feel like every employer should pay us a bonus because this is somebody who doesn't leave the law firm or doesn't kind of create a problem for an employer, not in a terrible way, but kind of this is not my passion, I'm unhappy, but I can't quit for a while type situation. Now, the challenge for us now is how do we help them figure out where they want to go with this law degree, probably one of these new innovative type jobs where, I think all of us are just getting their footing with those. So I think sometimes you build something without all the ramifications being obvious to you. But to answer your question, yes, I think having a clear mission, having a clear program that's distinguishable will attract some students, but we have to be clear that if we're not everything to everybody, there will be some who are not coming because we don't do whatever they think third year should be about.
Right. Well, and I'll say, I mean, one of the things that's interesting to me about today and about this conference and others like it is that I do think there's a national group of deans and professors and students and others who have become sort of self-aware as legal education entrepreneurs, right? They know they're starting to know who each other are. They're starting to know what's happening at different schools. Whether that gets translated into any kind of network or branding or gets communicated out to potential students is a whole other issue and very hard, obviously. I mean, we've seen students coming here because of some of the innovative things that we do, because of Silicon Flatirons, because of various other things, but hard to, as you said, there's a lot of unintended consequences and it's hard to figure out sometimes. Let me stop us there because I know we have a scheduled break and I want to make sure you have it. Please join me in thanking the panel. Break runs until 2:50, so you've got 15 minutes and we've certainly teed up enough for the next panel. So